Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
He talked about right to life. He talked about the family. He talked about gender. Those are the issues that are near and dear to evangelical Christians.
MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love.
There's a clash between the Judeo-Christian worldview and the secular worldview. We've had several of our members had their banking canceled, had contracts with credit card processors canceled.
America must choose to build the future or obsess about the past.
There's a lot of pressure to silence the Christian message.
Good evening. Welcome to NTD's Fresh Look America. I'm your host, Paul Graney. Troy Miller is the CEO of National Religious Broadcasters. It's the world's largest association of Christian communicators. It represents over 1,000 organizations which reach millions of viewers, listeners, and readers. NRB aims to defend the rights of Christian communicators, think their freedom of speech, freedom of belief, or freedom of press. These are rights enshrined in America's Constitution. But Miller says today some people want to take away these rights from American Christians, and he says they're doing just that. Troy Miller, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me today.
Troy, why do you say that President Biden's recent remarks about Trump and his supporters being a threat to democracy is directed at Christians?
Well, if you really look into some of the underlying things that he said in that speech, he talked about going backwards. And he talked about going backwards on kind of three major areas. He talked about right to life. He talked about the family. He talked about gender. And he said America is going backwards. It was the Trump supporters who go there. Well, if you look at those issues, those are the issues that are near and dear to evangelical Christians. We are very pro-life. We are very pro-family. And we believe in the Bible that says there are really only two genders, male and female. So you look at the speech in a whole, and you look at the audience and think that overwhelmingly evangelicals voted for President Trump, and you say, well, the president's really talking to us.
Why would the administration target Christians specifically?
I think because one of the things we're seeing here that's going on is not just political, and I think it's really interesting that the president kind of stepped out of talking about politics and Republicans in general and really targeted Trump followers in specific. We really see a clash of worldviews going on here. There's a clash between the Judeo-Christian worldview and the secular worldview. And if you look at these issues, that's really where a lot of these flashpoints boil down to. It's the clash between Judeo-Christian values and secular values today. And so I think that's where the president's looking at his base and going, my base is this secular base. They believe in all of these freedoms. They believe that gender transition should be allowed at the youngest ages. And they're saying the real opposition to that is the Judeo-Christian view. It's really evangelical Christians and Catholics as well. You know, Catholics are very pro-life, and I think some of the numbers I saw is up to 50% of the Catholic vote went towards Trump. And so the president's kind of reaching out and saying this area is an area that's dangerous to America. And it's really sad because America was founded on Christian values. The founding fathers, for the most part, were all Christians. They looked at the Bible as their source and guide for a lot of the principles that the country was founded upon and set upon. Our Constitution, the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence are full of references to God and to the Creator. And the president, I think, has gone after this group.
But there are Democrat Christians as well. Are these people not going to be alienated?
Well, you know, there are Democrat Christians, and Christianity is a wide and a big group. There are a section of Christianity that are more liberal in their thinking that might align to that. We would say traditional Orthodox evangelicals or Orthodox Christianity isn't going to align up with those things. They're going to line up more with the traditional family, marriage between a man and a woman. They're going to line up that life begins at conception, and they're going to line up more to male and female is the only gender genders that God created. So yeah, there's a section of Democrats, but also there are Democrats who hold to those Christian values, and I think the president isolated those folks as well.
You feel this isn't an isolated case or an outlier from the president. You see this as a bigger trend.
It's a bigger trend that's gone on in kind of society in general, or we've seen this happen in the social media network. So just today there was a story talking about Yelp, who's changed their designations for pregnancy care centers. And pregnancy care centers, my wife happens to volunteer at one. They do a lot more than just talk to potential folks about pro-life issues and abortion. They help many families, many expecting mothers with advice, with training, with support up through their pregnancy. After their pregnancy, they provide diapers and baby food and other things here. But yet the culture, Yelp has decided that they're going to change the way people search, and it's harder to find a pregnancy care center. So we see a lot of that going on in society today. We see the cancel culture. If you're on social media platforms, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and you talk about that there are only two genders out there, you will find your account suspended in a hurry. And so we see a lot of pushback against what we would say are traditional Christian values in society today. But most of that's all coming from the left. And the really scary thing about it is, with a lot of the revelations that have come out today of the collaboration between the government and the social media platforms to silence certain messaging, that's a really scary thought. Recently, I think it was six members of Congress, a couple of senators recently wrote to Google and asked Google to change their search parameters on how pregnancy care centers were brought up when somebody searched for pregnancy help, and to flag pregnancy care centers as misinformation. And that's scary that the government would do that and say, hey, why is the government getting involved in these issues, which are issues of faith and issues for society to deal with?
What is the political aspect to this, or the political advantage to shutting down this message?
Again, I think it's because certain political groups have moved so far to the left or so far secular to shut this message down. They see this as the main opposition to what they're trying to accomplish. And so the pro-life movement, which values life from conception to death, so we say from conception to the grave, we value life. Many in the left and the movement want to be able to terminate a pregnancy at any point in time, and even some folks have talked about terminating a pregnancy after the babies have been born. And then there's, on the other end of it, there's the whole euthanasia side of it. There's the whole end of life experience, and we believe that God's the one who's in charge of all of that. But the left wants to say, no, we really want to decide what life is and what defines life, and when we define life should end. And so they look at the pro-life movement, you look at the pro-family movement. Families are the foundation, we believe, of society. A strong family with a father and a mother raising children, passing on the values of that family has onto their children, is important to most Christians. We don't want the state indoctrinating our children, but many on the left want to pull children into the public school system and indoctrinate them to undermine the views that parents are trying to teach these children. And so really, if you look at it, it's the Christian families, the Judeo-Christian families, that are really opposed to that are the ones that are standing up and say our values matter, our beliefs matter, our opinions matter. And the same way with the whole gender issue today. So if you just look at those three issues, the main opposition to those kinds of issues is the Christian worldview. And so the left, rather than having good debate that we used to have on this again, is just saying, shut it down. Just shut it down. Don't let them talk. Don't let them. And they label groups that are trying to help people, they label them as hate groups. So if you talk about a pro-family message, if you talk about a pro-sexual responsibility and moral message today, you're going to get labeled a hate group. You're going to get labeled people that hate. But Christians are founded on love. It's not about hate. hate, it's about love. So if you believe the Christian message, if you think that there is an eternity, that the soul lives forever, and you look at somebody, it's sort of like looking at somebody that's about to walk in front of a bus. You can say, well, that person has that choice. They can walk in front of the bus, or you might yell at that person and say, hey, hold on, there's a bus right there. Now, they may stop and listen to you and stop and say, oh, thank you for stopping me from stepping in front of the bus. Or they may decide to not listen to you at all and step in front of the bus. But you would step in and save their life if you thought they were going to step in a bus. Christians believe the same thing. We believe that eternally people are headed to a place of torment and destruction if they don't turn around to God. If they don't turn to the salvation that we find in Jesus Christ, then they're heading that direction. So Christians want to and feel obligated to share that message. Now, you don't have to listen to that message. You don't have to respond to that message. But Christians want the opportunity to be able to openly share that message today and share the values that we believe the Bible brings to society that helps us as a society to work and relate to one another. And that's important to us.
Why do they dislike the message so much?
Well, you know, the Christian message, the gospel, has always been an offense to people. I think the gospel itself is a convicting message. It's a message about living life the way God wants us to live life and not the way we want to live our own life. And rather than just ignore that message, people feel convicted when they hear the gospel. And in some people, that response is to come back to God. But in other people, that response is anger and hate, and it brings out that and that brings out real life action then for people.
Because the people, they feel inadequate because of it? They feel guilty because of the message?
Yeah, some of it's inadequacy, some of it's guilt, some of it is they just feel like they don't want anybody meddling in their lives or telling them how to live. But there's an inherent sort of, why we believe man is sort of inherently sinful, but there's also a draw to God, a draw to our Creator. And so the gospel message really cuts to the core for people, and people have to decide, what kind of life am I living? Am I living a life that I'm really proud of, or am I living a life I'm ashamed of? And shame brings out fear, and fear brings out hate, and hate brings out action. And so we see a lot of those sort of things today. So rather than say, well, your view, we really have a time today where it's hard to have a good dialogue, to have good debate today, honest debate. So rather than having honest debate about the Christian message, we just want to shut it down.
So you think the people who are trying to silence the Christian message, they dislike the message so much that they're willing to take away people's rights to do it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's without a doubt. We've just seen example after example of that, where social media companies, even companies that are into services and products. We've had several of our members had their banking canceled, had contracts with telemarketing companies that were canceled, had contracts with credit card processors canceled. And we've heard a lot of stories that it's hard for Christian ministries today to get liability insurance for what they're doing. So there's just a lot of, as I said, real life examples out there that this is a growing trend.
You're in an interesting position in this issue because you represent the people who are communicating traditional values, Christian values. What are they saying to you about what they're seeing?
Well, a lot of them are very concerned about the cancel culture and concerned about reaching their audiences or reaching their congregations. So NRB represents Christian communicators, which are in television and radio program producers, publishers, podcasters, bloggers, a number of different people that we represent. But we also represent a lot of pastors who are preaching on Sundays, preaching from their pulpits or teaching from studios, and they're talking about these issues. We know a number of pastors who address pro-life issues and had their programs even taken off of mainstream media. Airing their program, pro-life program, was taken off of mainstream cable channels that they were buying airtime for. And so that's a major concern for them. If our message is going to continue to be blocked because of the bias against it, that's a First Amendment issue. That's a freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And when the government gets involved, then it's a violation of those First Amendment principles, because we have a right to free speech. We have a right to free exercise of religion. Why is the government getting involved at this point in time?
How does it feel to think about perhaps in the future you may not be able to share this message so widely?
Well, I don't know about that. I think the Christian message will always go forward. It may go underground, as it's done so in so many countries like China and other communist countries. The message has gone underground. But we believe we live in a constitutional society that gives us that right, that gives us the right to openly communicate in the public square. And NRB is out there to defend that Christian organizations can do that. They can communicate in the public square just like any other organization can today. And that's what we fight hard so that that doesn't happen.
Tell me your understanding of platforms, social media platforms, both the traditional ones or the incumbents, we'll say Twitter, Facebook, versus these more alternative ones or newer ones, Truth Social, Getter, etc. How do you see these platforms?
Well, so I think it's good that there are alternatives popping up and coming to the forefront to say, hey, we value freedom of speech, we value the right to people to hold opinions. The government's already defined in many court cases what hate speech is, what hate action is, and so following those guidelines we think are good. We know that the social media platforms today, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they have a pretty strong foothold in the conversations today, and we don't want to be marginalized just to platforms that we can communicate to our whole audience on. We want to be able to communicate again in the public square. So we think it's good that these other platforms are popping up and that they hold to those kind of freedom, but we also think it's right that we should be able to communicate on the mainstream highways as well. It's sort of like the whole net neutrality. If you look what the FCC talked about net neutrality, they didn't want the internet providers to say who got to run on the highway and who didn't, who got to take the highway, who got to take the back roads. Well, it's the same thing for us. We don't want to say what the Christian worldview message doesn't get the highway, it has to take all the back roads. It has to go on to the dirt roads. That's the only place you can communicate. That's not right. That's not what America was founded on. That's not the kinds of freedoms that we value here.
Can you give some examples of where the Christian message is on the back roads at the moment?
Well, I would say almost anything in the pro-life sector today, since the Supreme Court Dobbs position today. If you talk about pro-life issues, a number of our members have been deplatformed for talking about that. A number of folks have been deplatformed for talking about the gender issues as well. Those two issues are the main deplatforming issues out there. If you try to talk about those issues from a Christian value standpoint, you're risking having your ministry or your voice deplatformed off those major social media highways.
What do you think the solution to that is?
I think that there's several solutions that Congress needs to look at. Now, we realize that these are private businesses, and in some cases they have the rights to do business with whom they see to do business with, but we think that the unfair nature of these monopolies really needs to be looked at by Congress. We need to look at Section 230, which gives these, sort of indemnifies these organizations from their editorial role. We think they're playing an editorial role today, so we need to look at that, and maybe that needs to be pulled back. We may need to look at these as we did back in the 80s, as these monopolies may need to be broken up. So I think there's a number of solutions that Congress needs to step in and look at. And I think if these social media platforms themselves would just step up to the plate and really kind of self-govern. Facebook started that with their oversight board somewhat. I don't think they've gone far enough. It takes, the process is too bureaucratic. It takes too long. long to, once you're banned from Facebook, it takes too long to get your case seen by the oversight board and to get that process and to get you back on. By that time, the issues may be gone altogether. So there's just a number of things, and we're hoping that Congress and some of the solutions that we come up with, we're trying to work one-on-one with the social media platforms as well to educate them more about who evangelical Christians are and how big of a group this is and what kind of issues are really important to us.
Let's talk a little bit about the innovation, perhaps how people are maybe skirting around these restrictions or barriers. You have a big conference once a year, I believe, with all your members or many of your members. Tell us about some of the new things or innovations they've come up with.
Yeah, we do. NRB holds a national conference annually. It's the largest gathering of Christian communicators. We'll be in Orlando, Florida next year in May. You can find that on nrbconvention.org. And we pull people together. So we do advocacy. That's a big part of what we do. But another part of what we do is to help people network and learn best practices. And we live in a great innovative time right now. I'm a technology guy by sort of foundation. That's my background. And so we live in a great time for technology. It's a great time to get into media because the cost to get into producing media today is so much lower, so much easier to get into podcasting or video podcasting. And so we see a lot of innovative things coming on. We see a lot of people developing new things for how to share the gospel, to how to communicate on prayer, to how to communicate together and collaborate together on Bible studies and theology research. And so there are a lot of new websites and new technologies popping up, a lot of new apps. People are being very creative in that. And also with the internet too, outside of social media platforms, the app world helps you to get directly to people without having to go through social media platforms or through those communications. So people are being very innovative in how they do this, especially the younger generations, the under 40s who have grown up in this environment. They've grown up in the digital world. It's first nature to them. They didn't know a world without an iPhone. So they've come up with really creative ways to do things to meet people's needs. And so at the conference, they get together and they share those kind of ways. And then that really expands and really gets kind of the ball rolling. It's a lot of fun. It's an exciting time to live in for technology. It's never been a greater time where we can communicate and meet people today as long as the gatekeepers let the water keep flowing.
A lot to look forward to. Troy Miller, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.